Welcome everybody. For those I've yet to meet, I'm John Paul Diversa. I'm the Senior Energy Planner with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. We do ask that you keep yourselves muted and your cameras off to conserve bandwidth. Please use the chat feature to submit any questions. If we're unable to get to them during the presentation, we'll be sure to cover them during the Q&A at the end. All right, so today and tomorrow are all about utility scale solar projects and the considerations from both local government and community perspectives. On Wednesday is the Community Solar Roundtable. Community solar has been used across the country to improve energy access and affordability. We're happy to share these experiences here in Central Ohio. And on Thursday, we'll be discussing community choice aggregation. As you probably know, the City of Columbus has approved their aggregation program, and we're expecting it to become a model for both the region and the nation. So we'll be using the same login information each day, so please feel free to join us for any session that you're able to. All right, and real quick before we jump in, over the last 4 years, MORPC has been building out our energy planning resources. These are available to both our members and stakeholders in the region. Please visit our website to learn more about these opportunities, or feel free to reach out to me directly. You'll be hearing a little bit about some new programming coming out soon. Certainly, if you were part of Energy Academy, you got a sneak preview of some of these things. So I'll save that for later, however. All right, so why are we here? The interest in solar development right now is booming, especially large-scale solar projects. A few years ago, if you said that developers would be looking to Ohio to build some of the largest solar arrays, we'd be shocked to say the least, right? But today, however, it's happening, and it's happening very fast. Chances are someone is already approaching members of your communities to lease their land. This may be your first experience with utility scale solar. This may be your first experience with 1,000+ acre developments. And with these developments bring a host of opportunities and issues. So we're talking pretty significant revenue streams. We're talking very engaged citizenry and all of their concerns. Some of these concerns are very valid and very real. Some of them are misinformed. And so dealing with both of these is something that we're going to be covering throughout Solar Week. And as well, these projects are large enough to significantly change some communities. And so for many of you, there's quite a lot to consider. So the point of Solar Week is to prepare our members to be able to be strong advocates for their communities in whatever form that takes. It may be encouraging development, it may be guiding it, it may be stopping it. These are decisions for you to make. And the speakers this week in MORPC, we're just here to provide you with objective information. And today we have two great and very knowledgeable people on the topic. We have Dale Arnold from the Ohio Farm Bureau. So projects of this magnitude almost certainly mean farmland. And we also have Matthew Butler from the Ohio Power Siting Board. Utility scale solar projects will undoubtedly mean the Ohio Power Siting Board's involvement. So with that, Dale, I'm going to bring up your presentation and I'll turn it over to you.
But better than thoughts? I want to turn thoughts into action.
Yeah, that's what
So.
it just takes a couple of months.
Hi, folks. This is Dale Arnold. I'd like to thank you for coming and welcome. Also, too, that interference or that information or that thing is not coming basically from my microphone. So let's just make sure everyone has their microphones muted as we go forward, which would be great.
Oh, him, because it'll hear that.
Yeah,
Grabbing that, Dale.
I'll let you, if he doesn't call me, let's say by.
There we go. Okay. I'm going to turn off my camera too. I just wanted you to see who I was to begin with and different things. So we'll go from here and you should see on the screen, and John Paul will be directing my slides and different things. Also like to say this is the start of a conversation. County Farm Bureau, we work a lot with local governments, township trustees, county commissioners, community stakeholders, economic development groups, and that. Which means this, if you need some more information and different things, please contact your County Farm Bureau organization director, your County Farm Bureau office, and we'll be more than happy basically to continue this conversation and do some briefings. Also, you'll see too is my email address at the bottom of this, and you can also send information or send a request or questions after this presentation to me too. Let's go to the next slide, John Paul. I always start with this because, you know, farmers really get it. Farming, as you know, is a commodity intensive business. When you talk about corn, wheat, beans, cattle, many of our inputs, fuel, fertilizer, prices are basically determined by work on commodity exchanges, laws of supply and demand over time. What's also interesting is this, if you take a look at this slide, you'll see technical analysis or pricing charts for crude oil, natural gas, and electric generation, because when it comes to energies, electric generation is also a commodity. Prices are determined with regard to supply and demand over time. As you're working with energy service providers and developers in your local community, they're always thinking about this. And also please remember this, the at now immediate time frame for them to do things to address energy related issues is actually a minimum 30-year time block. They're always looking out that far basically to address issues. As a matter of fact, as part of this particular process, before they're allowed to proceed with their projects here in Ohio, many of them have to do a number of prerequisite requirements. They will have a number of power purchase agreements. Standard power purchase agreement basically here in the United States is a 30-year time block. They'll also have a portfolio of intermediate and spot pricing charts with regard to that. And so they're working in this commodity market too. Also, with the exception basically of probably one plant, which is not a solar plant in Northern Ohio, all of these energy generation projects, utility scale, are merchant plants, merchant function, which means they're selling that electricity under these contractual arrangements to a number of developers, possibly utilities, large industries, community aggregation groups. And because they're selling it under a market function, eminent domain provisions do not apply, which means your ability to work with energy service providers, negotiate key provisions and stipulations under the Ohio Power Siting Board process, and work with planning going forward is much better than you think. Things are much different since 1999 when you talk about a market-based function, which became legal in Ohio. Many of our grandparents, great-grandparents, when it came to energy development, always thought about eminent domain. That particular vision or that particular mindset or collective consciousness is still very much there, but things have changed since the beginning of this century. It's merchant function, and you have the ability to negotiate a number of things. Eminent domain provisions do not apply. Let's go to the next slide, John Paul. I also show people this. Our Farm Bureau members asked me quite a while ago, hey, can you give me an apples to apples comparison on how agriculture uses different types of energy? I got this information from the Energy Information Agency with the U.S. Department of Energy. And this basically is agricultural energy consumption in MMBTUs, a caloric or heat value. It doesn't have to do with price, because we all know how energy prices have been since the 1970s. This is on actual use or consumption of that. If you'll take a look there, distillate, which is gas and diesel fuel principally, is green. You will also see, and John Paul, if you could bring up the screen again. There we go. As you'll see here, basically, distillate basically is green. You'll see blue, which is natural gas, and you're probably saying, well, gosh, Dale, our use of those fuels is actually decreasing over the decades, and you're correct. Price is not, but use of it is. And I need to remind a lot of folks, when you take a look at the automobiles, the combines, the engines and different things, they've become much more fuel efficient over the last several decades. And yes, that's helped us with the reliance of that fuel. But I also need to tell you this, there's been a lot of switching of different fuel sources basically by a number of folks. And electricity has become basically the fuel of choice. And you're seeing electric consumption basically in agriculture at this particular time. I need to also tell you this, when it comes to residential homes, rural, suburban, and urban, when you take a look also too at businesses and industries, you see similar types of patterns when it becomes basically having to do with energy and our source basically of fuel. And electricity, for many of us, is becoming that particular fuel of choice. Let's go to the next slide, John Paul. This is what you would call local electricity. Local electricity is not just a group of counties or a neighborhood or a community. Ohio belongs to what's called PJM interconnection. PJM is Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland is what it's called, because that's where it started at the beginning of the last century, in the 20th century. It's our independent service operator. It basically manages and maintains basically the utilization of our interstate transmission network and also our power generation infrastructure. PJM is a collection of transmission networks, power generation infrastructures, and also too, with the colors you're seeing here, local distribution companies. Ohio is part of basically of a 13-state network from the Carolinas to as far north and west as basically Chicago. Again, it's interesting too, is that if you are part of this particular system, when you deliver electricity into the system, yes, through trade arbitrage and through pooling provisions, you can have different other entities purchase that basically through long-term supply agreements, intermediate and spot, which means you're talking here about a network and an interstate system where electricity will be bought, sold, traded within this system. And yes, you can also trade into other systems like most of Indiana and Illinois, or what's called MISO, which is the Midwest Independent Service Organization. You have the TVA, or the Tennessee Valley Authority south of here. But this is what you talk about when you're talking about local electricity. Let's go to the next slide, John Paul. We also need to tell you this, because the generation assets basically in this system are changing at a very rapid pace and have been over the last 30 or so years. This is from the Energy Information Agency, U.S. Department of Energy, and these basically are reported coal-fired generation retirements between 2012 and 2016, and this process is still going on. As a matter of fact, 3 out of every 5 coal-fired power plants in the United States are totally decommissioned and closed. You're seeing a tremendous amount of transmission and generation assets here in Ohio in the Appalachian Plateau. That could be combined cycle natural gas-fired turbine generation, utilizing a number of shale assets we have basically here in Ohio in the Appalachian Plateau. That could be wind generation assets, solar, biomass, fuel cell, and hydro. We're going from 1 or 2 major sources, coal and nuclear, in the 20th century. Those assets will still be with us and be part of this portfolio well into the second half of the century, but you're also seeing other types of technologies replace and enhance this portfolio going forward. Another reason why they are here. Let's go to the next series of slides, John Paul. Just need to show you this. These are Ohio-based power plants which are now closed over the last several years. I won't go through all of these, but if you take a look on the right-hand side with regard to the type, you start seeing a pattern. When you're talking about closed power plants, you're seeing a number of them being coal-related. This has nothing basically to do with rule and regulation or environmental movement. Many of these plants literally are older. The coal-fired fleet in the Appalachian Plateau, the average age basically of a coal-fired generation facility is around 60 to 70 years old. Many of these came online between the end of World War II and the Korean conflict. The youngest assets in this portfolio or in this fleet came on in the early to mid 1970s. And literally, when you take a look at the cost of fuel, the transportation involved, the age basically of the turbine technology, the maintenance costs and things, many of these economically have gotten to be too old to run, and many energy service providers, be it a utility or be it basically an independent company, are switching and investing in other more cost-effective forms basically of generation technology. Let's go to the next slide, because this is one thing here, but watch the pattern. These are operational. Many of the ones in red are scheduled to close here by 2021 through 2025. You'll see also the types with regard to that. And you will also see two other types of technologies come online: solar, natural gas. And if you take a look also at the next slide, John Paul, please switch. You'll also see a tremendous amount of natural gas assets that are coming online, and the start basically of wind and solar and hydroelectric basically coming online too. That's the transitional process basically that we're seeing, hopefully here in a nutshell. Gives you some idea about what's happening. Let's go to the next slide, John Paul. This is a slide, and I tell you what's great, and Matt can also help with this. This is a picture of a map you can get basically from the Ohio Power Siting Board's website, and it shows the concentration of utility-based solar projects basically in Ohio. And right now, I downloaded this at the beginning of January, and it needs to be updated again, and you can get a more recent copy of that with the Power Siting Board website. And I'm sure my friend Matt will go through with regard to that. Right now, there are 28 different projects going under the Ohio Power Siting Board application process to be approved in this state. And I also need to tell you this, there's another 5 or 6 that they don't know about yet. We're leasing activity, outreach to farmers and rural residents, talking with folks basically are going on. In Morpsey's area, you're seeing Licking, Knox, Coshocton, Muskingum. Outside the area to the east, Holmes, Wayne, Ashtabula, where you're seeing folks talking with people, all pre-filing process before the Ohio Power Siting Board, where different service providers are exploring working with communities, working with others to do other utility scale solar projects in Ohio, and this trend will continue. Let's go to the next slide, John Paul. I tell people this, you are going to be seeing a number of things happening since the beginning of this century and leading into the middle part of the 2050s. You are seeing a very rapid chain of development with regard to energy generation, transmission, and distribution assets. You're going to be working very closely with a number of energy service providers. They could be public utilities, they could be independent energy companies, they could be a combination basically of the two investors with regard to that. Also, when it comes to solar, please be advised that this will not be the only energy development project many of you will work with in your community. But I also need to tell you this, is that what you learn working with one developer now will basically be valuable experience when you have the opportunity or responsibility to work with others. We have a number of folks who are working with oil and gas development coming from the eastern part of the state and working its way west with shale oil and gas development. Pipeline infrastructure, both interstate as well as intrastate and utility service programs is huge with regard to this. You might be taking a look at combined cycle natural gas fired turbine generation being established where pipelines basically are projected to be installed. Will you be working with wind energy development? Probably yes, because besides large scale utility scale projects, we also have a number of other projects, such basically as one with Honda at their transmission project in West Liberty, and a number of other projects through Northern Ohio where large industries, Whirlpool and others, are investing on this type of technology on site. The ability to work with township trustees, county commissioners, power siting board, and others will be working there. You'll also be taking a look at biomass, the number of municipalities. The number of municipalities basically who are using their resources from their wastewater treatment facilities to create different types of fuel. They help them with regard to waste management. They help them with regard to energy production is there. You will also be taking a look at a number of transmission line upgrades with AEP and others. And you've seen a number of those just south of town in the southern portion of Morpsey's service area. And you're starting to see a number of utility line upgrades, transmission and distribution systems going on there. You will also see too, as solar and wind basically are coming online, the next logical step will be energy storage systems, large battery arrays that these plants will not necessarily energize and deliver electrons into the transmission grid, but into an on-site storage facility. That on-site storage facility will basically deliver power, baseload capacity into the system, just like today's coal, nuclear, and combined cycle natural gas fired turbine generation plants. I also show you this, if you'll take a look at, there's kind of a meter there, and this is happening all over Morpsey, especially in the investor-owned areas. We're seeing a large switch out of traditional metering, analog metering, to digital two-way communication devices. Consequently, when that happens, many of the constituents that you serve will have a number of opportunities to help control their energy costs. You'll be taking a look at buying appliances with VG chips, electronic wireless networks where they will be communicating with each other, and with a software program in a laptop on a kitchen counter or in an office, in a home, a farm, a business, to help share and manage the load, which means this, you're going to be seeing a number of things happening on the utility scale, transmission, generation, but also on the local distribution scale with your local utilities and with consumers themselves. Let's take a look at the next slide, John Paul, which means this. Besides taking a look at utility scale development, you'll probably be working with your friends, your neighbors, consumers, your constituents on software deployment, management software for homes, farms, businesses, lighting technology, heating, ventilation, air conditioning upgrades, insulation and sealing will be paramount in a number of things, and very aggressive demand side management energy efficiency policies going forward. Like I've said before, once you've basically taken a look at and you've worked with one energy service provider, you're going to be able to use that experience tackling a number of issues, a number of things having to do with technologies going forward. Let's take a look at the next slide. People ask us, what is Farm Bureau's policy? We have a very extensive policy development process, which starts at the county level. We have over 500 people involved with the state level on policy development, and it also works on the national level. When you join Farm Bureau, it's a vertically integrated system. You belong to your county, the state, and the American Farm Bureau, all under one membership fee. Energy development policy here in the state is that the Ohio Farm Bureau supports energy development efforts that involve the project developer, incumbent utilities, regulatory agencies, government at the local, state, and federal levels, economic development authorities, and community groups. Everyone basically needs to be at the table. These efforts should focus on creation of projects to address environmental concerns, consider aesthetic needs, provide economic benefits to landowners in their community. A lot of people will ask us, hey, what's Farm Bureau's position on an energy development project? And consequently, with regard to solar and different things, we tell people this is that we do have members on both sides of the issue. Members who support this type of project and are working with folks to develop projects very much on the local level, and also members and their neighbors who have concerns and need those concerns answered and addressed. And it's been our job through our policy to help both sides do that. And I do meetings local level in many communities at kitchen tables, in fire halls, in township buildings, and with local communities to help both sides of this issue be involved in the process. Let's take a look basically at wind and solar, our policy there. People will ask us, are you for a wind or solar project or against it? We tell folks this is that those decisions need to be made on the individual level. We support the Ohio Power Siting Board process and help our members and community stakeholders and local governments get involved in that process. When it comes to wind and solar, our policy is we support the Ohio Power Siting Board's rules, regulations, stipulations, orders, and amendments that provide landowner-friendly, reasonable, and uniform statewide procedures for siting, placement, construction, and operation of utility-scale wind and solar farms. Farm Bureau members have been involved in around 80 Power Siting Board cases having to do with utility infrastructure over the last couple of decades. We advocate the process. It's a judicial process. It allows all folks to be involved in the process, and we work with our members and other interested stakeholders to be involved in that process because everyone needs to be heard. Everyone needs to recognize their civic responsibility to be engaged in these processes as discussions go forward. Let's take a look at the next slide, and I'm almost done here, John Paul. Again, I'd say this, congratulations, welcome aboard. I'm really glad that you're here. Welcome to the community development project or process when it comes to energy. A tremendous amount of discussion, outreach, and action needs to be done. There needs to be coordinated efforts with the developer, local government, regulatory agencies, economic and regional development commissions, and community groups. Everyone needs to be involved. We need to take a look at project development that addresses environmental concerns, considers aesthetics, and provides economic benefits. That's it with my presentation. That's what Farm Bureau is about. If you need more information and materials, you have my email address, and I'd like to turn it back over to John Paul and also Mr. Matthew Butler with the Ohio Power Siting Board, who will basically work with you to let you know how to get involved in the process. Gentlemen, back to you.
All right, Dale, thank you so much. Real quick to everybody, if you have questions, go ahead and start throwing them in the chat. Dale, I have one question for you before we jump into Matt's presentation, just to give him a little time to get ready. So the community members will undoubtedly reach out to their local governments to start asking questions, and they'll want to ensure that the local government is somehow involved, and they'll want confidence that they're being protected in this. What are some of the best things that our local governments can do to be prepared to answer community questions?
Good question. Number one is to do a tremendous amount of research right now. I work with a lot of communities. If you would like to have a briefing, you know, Farm Bureau is not a government agency. We're not a power company, but we're considered a valid third opinion. I also work very closely with the Ohio Townships Association with Heidi Fouts, and also with the County Commissioners Association with John Lutz and others to do training. Many of your folks who are county commissioners, township trustees, probably have seen me at training sessions at their state meetings pre-COVID. Doing that research is huge. I also think too, when given the opportunity, if an energy service provider is working in the area, invite them basically to your sessions as county commissioners and township trustees to understand what the goals and objectives are basically of the program, what they're doing, starting dialogue basically with them. Also explore with your county prosecutor, who's your legal counsel, how can we be involved as a party of record in the Ohio Power Siting Board process. I'm sure Matt will be getting into that a little bit more in detail, but your ability to do that as a local government is much easier than what you think. Doing that type of research, understanding what's going on, being involved in the process and different things is huge. When much of this development was happening 4 to 5 to 6 years ago, especially the further west you get into the state, many of our local governments didn't understand or appreciate or realize their ability to work with the Power Siting Board and their responsibilities to take a look at a number of different things in this process going forward. Everything from negotiating the pilot payment to working with negotiating on key stipulations and negotiations as part basically as of permits going forward. And also where to access accurate information that would help them answer a number of issues, concerns that their constituents would probably be asking them. I hope that I help you with that, John Paul.
Very much so. We had 2 other questions come in real quick. One from Jim Schimmer, Dale, is sales tax charged on the purchase of solar panels? And then along the same lines, in a general sense, what types of revenues would you anticipate for a landowner?
Good questions. I would say this. What I am seeing, without getting into a lot of lease details for landowners, when you're taking a look at leasing activities long term, I tell farmers to take a look at this. How much would you earn in income after you take a look at all your inputs and all your expenses on production of corn, wheat, and beans on an acre of ground? How much income are you basically yielding or generating per year? And how much basically is the company taking a look at offering you when it comes to renting that ground long term? Many of the farmers I work with basically are saying this is something we really need to take a look at because it can be somewhere around 3 times the amount of income generated from leasing the ground than it would be keeping it in agricultural production over a 30-year time span. We also work very closely with our members and get them access to very good legal counsel that will help them with planning, multi-generational plans on income sharing between grandparents, parents, children, taking a look at structures with regard to tax, and also taking a look at a number of key provisions in a solar or energy development lease or easement that will impact our ground that they need to negotiate there. When it comes to taxes and things, there are a number of federal taxes with regard to that. Those federal tax benefits and charges are usually between the developer delivering the electricity into the system and those who are purchasing it wholesale at a utility scale. But on the local level, county commissioners especially, with Senate Bill 232 provisions that were passed 12 years ago, they have a huge responsibility in doing final negotiation for the payment in lieu of taxes program, which basically provides benefits and revenue to county commissioners, township trustees, and especially the local school systems in the area where these projects are located. For more information about that, please contact me and we can get into more detail, and I can also get you access to other persons who can help answer those questions.
All right, thanks, Dale. Why don't we turn it over to Matt, and then we'll come back and get some of the other questions that have come in. In the meantime, Matt, are you with us?
I sure am. Hello, good
All
morning.
All right. It's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you, John Paul. Thanks, Morpsey, for having us here this week to help kick off Solar Week. As was said earlier, I think it's a great time to be having this conversation. It's a very timely topic. our caseload on the solar side of things has greatly increased over the last year or so. And I want to thank Dale too for helping set the stage for my presentation here. And I'm going to go ahead and share my slides here, if you'll bear with me just one second. Okay, John Paul, can you see those all right?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, great. So again, I'm Matt Butler. I'm with the Power Siting Board, and I am going to kind of take things from where Dale set the stage and move ahead and talk about some of the ways that you can get involved in our process here at the Power Siting Board. If there are two things I want you to take away from what I'm going to talk about this morning, it's one, that the state does have a well-defined process for projects like this, and that two, there are well-defined ways that you can participate in that process, and we certainly strongly encourage both local government participation and participation from members of the community, whether they be landowners or neighbors involved in the project. So a little bit about the Siting Board. We are the state of Ohio agency that reviews projects to build major utility facilities in Ohio. The board's membership is comprised of 7 voting members, and they are the directors of the state agencies that you see here in front of you. So our chair is the chairperson of the Public Utilities Commission. And then we have on our board the directors of the Ohio EPA, the Ohio Department of Agriculture, the Development Services Agency, Department of Natural Resources, and the Department of Health. And then we have a 7th voting member who is an engineer appointed by the governor. In addition to our 7 voting members, we have 4 non-voting members, 2 from each house of the Ohio legislature, Republican and Democrat each from the Senate, and the same from the House of Representatives. So you can see, based on the board's makeup, that we have a broad range of interests represented. Expertise is drawn from each of those agencies from the technical staff side. So we have a board that makes the final decision in these projects, but we also have a staff that investigates the proposals in depth before making recommendations to our board. And I'll talk about that some more here in a moment. So before any company, whether it's a utility or a merchant developer, can build a major utility facility, and that's a term that's defined in the statute, the OPSB will assure that it benefits Ohio citizens, promotes the state's economic interests, and protects the environment and land use. And now, while public and local government participation are strongly encouraged, the decision-making authority does rest solely with the Power Siting Board. So that's a question that we do get often from folks who are following along with a case. They'll ask, what is the local jurisdiction in a project like this? Does local zoning apply? And it does not. Again, though, however, we do strongly encourage that folks get involved in the process as it moves forward. If approved, the Power Siting Board issues what we call a certificate, but really that's a permit for the construction, operation, and maintenance of that facility. So I know today we're here on this gloomy, snowy morning, kind of hard to believe, to talk about solar farms, but it is a growing phenomenon in Ohio, really, again, over the past year or so. And that's the main reason we're here. Our jurisdiction over those types of projects begins at 50 megawatts. And I think I saw that was a question that popped up in the chat a moment ago. But in addition to solar, we do have jurisdiction over wind farms 5 megawatts or greater, fossil fuel powered plants 50 megawatts or greater. Lately, that's mainly been on the natural gas side of things. And then also we do have jurisdiction over certain electric transmission and natural gas transmission pipelines. And I just want to point that out because I know a lot of you as local officials are not only interested in the solar side of things, but may have questions moving forward on some of those other types of utility projects. This map here is the same map that Dale showed a moment ago, but he did mention that the map had been updated on our site. And this version of the map, you'll note there are several more dots representing solar farms across the state. I think Dale mentioned the project in Licking County. That's one of, I believe, two that are under development. The maps that you see here only shows the projects that are active in some stage at the Power Siting Board. So in addition to the projects that you see here, I'm aware of projects under works in some of these same counties, but also Darke County to the far west of the state, and in Greene County as well. So we do anticipate, as Dale had said earlier, that there are a number of projects that may not be before the board, but will be here in a short time. This information here in this chart that you see is just a statistical representation, really, of that same information on the map. And what this shows is the status of each project. So you'll see there in the sort of the peach color, those are the projects that have been approved by the board. They are projects that in some cases are under construction, but none of those projects are yet operational in Ohio. And then in the sort of light red, pink color, you'll see those are all the pending and pre-app solar facilities, 50 megawatts or greater, that are before the board right now. We have projects dating back to 2018, but then we've got projects that just entered the pre-application stage a matter of days ago, really. So it's keeping us very busy, and we are actually growing our staff so that we can adapt and keep up with the influx of cases. All right, so moving on from sort of the background about the board, I want to get into our process. And this flow chart here, although it looks overwhelming at first glance, does take you through the board's process from the beginning to the end. I'm not going to go through this step by step in detail currently, but I do want to point out that this flow chart is available on our website. And if you click on the hyperlink text, it'll actually take you to the administrative code section that provides more detail about each step along the way. Our process begins really from a public standpoint with what we call the informational meeting. And that is a chance for the developer to introduce the project to the public and get comment and feedback from the public before they bring in a formal application to the board. Once they bring in the application filing to the board, and that application is the proposal from the company in a formal format, it is going to include a narrative of the project, but also all the relevant studies and modeling that the applicant needs to do to comply with the Power Siting Board's rules. The staff will then take a period of time to review that, ensure that it meets all the application requirements, and assuming that it does, we'll move forward to the next phase in the project, which is the applicant paying their filing fee, serving that copy of that application on local officials, and then our legal department will set a procedural schedule for the case that will really time out the process from there. Generally say from the informational meeting to the point where the board is ready to make a decision, we're looking at about a 9-month review process. But to jump back a step here, once that procedural schedule is set by our legal department, the technical staff that I mentioned earlier from each of those board member agencies will conduct an investigation on paper, reviewing the application and the related studies, but also making site visits to ground truth that the information in that application is accurate. We'll be coordinating with other member agencies as well as agencies at the state and federal level that are outside of our board membership, such as the Department of Transportation, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Ohio Historic Preservation Office, among others. But at the end of that investigation, our staff will make a report that makes findings and recommendations to the voting board members. That report is merely a recommendation, it's not a final decision. And then moving on, we will have a public hearing, which is the formal opportunity for members of the public to provide sworn testimony that's transcribed by a court reporter and put into the case record for our board members to review. Shortly after the public hearing, we'll hold an adjudicatory hearing, which is an opportunity for all the parties to the case to present testimony and evidence and cross-examine one another. And then once all the hearing schedule has wrapped up in the case, sometimes you'll see a stipulation filed between two or more parties, which is essentially an agreement agreeing to certain terms and conditions and making another recommendation to the board. And you may see briefs and reply briefs go back and forth. But ultimately, once the hearings are over, it really goes to the board to make a decision. They meet once a month, and typically the third Thursday, to consider entries and orders. Then once a board issues a decision to accept or reject the application, it'll either issue or deny a certificate. And then we have a 30-day period where parties may request what we call rehearing, but is really a request for the board to reconsider all or parts of its decision. And then ultimately, following that rehearing process, if a party is still dissatisfied with the board decision, they can appeal that decision to the Supreme Court. So that was our process in a nutshell. I do want to get a little more in depth on some of the steps along the way, because that's really why we're here tonight, or this morning, I should say, is to provide information about the ways that you can get involved in that process at the local level. So again, that public informational meeting, that is the first opportunity for the public to learn about the project. That's where the developer will be providing information, including maps. Lately, unfortunately, due to COVID, we've been having to hold these meetings in a virtual format, but once we get back to a time where we can all meet together, these will be back to more of an open house format in person. But that's the developer's opportunity to gather input from the public, answer questions, and it's also our opportunity as the board to educate the public about our process and the way that they can get involved. At any point in our process, once a case number has been established, members of the public can provide public comments, and we take those comments in, we take those comments seriously. They help to guide the staff during its investigation. And one thing I always tell folks when they ask, you know, are you really listening to these comments? What I always tell them is, you know, if we don't hear from you, we don't know that you have concerns. We don't know that you support the project. We don't know that you're opposed to the project. And I would say the same thing to local officials. You know, if we don't hear from you, then we have to assume that you don't have concerns. We are taking steps here and plan to reach out to local officials more frequently in the upcoming year ahead of us. So this is an opportunity to kind of touch base with you all here first time, but do expect to be hearing from us on a more regular basis going forward as new cases come in, whether they be solar projects or other types of projects. So we have the public comment process, but then the more formal option for individuals to get involved is at the local public hearing. And again, that's where the board's going to obtain sworn statements from the public. Those are transcribed, so they do become a part of the official case record on which the board has to make its decision. And then we have the adjudicatory hearing, and I want to talk about something here you see in bold there, intervention. And intervention is something that allows other individuals and organizations outside of the developer and the OPSB staff to get involved more formally in the case and participate as a party of record. Oftentimes, Dale and the Farm Bureau will intervene in cases before the board, and oftentimes we'll have local townships, counties, or landowner groups intervene and participate in the process that way. As a local government, you simply have to file a notice with the board that states that you intend to intervene in the process. When you do that, you don't have to state that you are opposed to the project or that you support the project. You simply have to file notice that says that we as a local government want to participate as an intervener. The bar is a little bit higher for individuals or organizations, landowner groups that might form, but in those cases they have to file a request, and then that request would be considered by the administrative law judge who is running the proceeding, and it would be up to them to make a decision whether to allow that individual participate as a party or not. So once we get through the entire process there, these are the 8 criteria that the board is using to base its decision on. So just to go through these quickly, the first criteria only applies to electric transmission and gas pipelines, so it would not apply to any generation facility, including solar facilities, but that is to demonstrate a basis of need for the project. The second criteria there is the nature of the probable environmental impact. So the applicant would be expected to find the impacts, and then the board will review those. Third, the board has to determine whether the facility represents the minimum impact. They'd have to determine that the facility is consistent with regional plans for expansion of the electric power grid serving Ohio and the surrounding region. Dale mentioned earlier that that's the PJM interconnection. The fifth criteria is that the facility will comply with all air and water pollution and solid waste disposal laws, as well as air navigation rules and standards. Sixth, that the facility will serve the public interest, convenience, and necessity. Seventh, the facility's impact on the agricultural viability of land in an ag district. And 8, that the facility incorporates the maximum feasible water conservation practices. So these are the criteria that the board has to find and determine, and they're going to be basing that decision off that full case record that builds from the application through to the staff investigation and recommendations, through the public hearing, the adjudicatory hearing, and then any stipulations or agreements that may be filed. So just like a court's basing its decision on the full record, that's very similar to what the board's doing. So if a project is approved by the board, our jurisdiction does not end there, and we're not going to simply walk away once a certificate has been granted. We're going to monitor that facility through construction and operation to ensure that that developer is complying with the permit and any conditions contained in it. Now, these are just a few common things that the developer will have to do in any solar case. They are going to have to establish a complaint resolution process to address concerns that landowners might have during construction and operation. And ultimately, if a landowner is dissatisfied with the type of answers they're getting back, they can always reach out to us as well. The developer will have to obtain all the required transportation permits and coordinate with the local authority regarding road closures, road use agreements, and traffic control. So they're going to be working with, in most cases, the county engineer, county and township officials on those types of issues. They'll have to avoid and minimize damage to field tile and soil compaction. And if damage does take place, they'll have to repair or replace those damaged field tiles. And last but certainly not least, the developer will have to have a decommissioning plan in place to ensure that the project can be disassembled when it reaches the end of its useful life, and that the agricultural land is returned to its pre-existing condition. They're also going to have to provide for financial security to ensure that the funds are available to make sure that that decommissioning and land restoration can take place. That really is the end of what I had to share today. Very interested in any questions that you all may have, but I did want to leave you here with some contact information. Our website, opsb.ohio.gov. You can find information about all the pending cases that are currently before the board. View that map that Dale and I both shared, as well as that flow chart that takes you step by step through the process. Our docketing information system is a subset of the website that we share with the Public Utilities Commission. And on that site, you can view all the case documents and public comments that are filed in each case. You can also subscribe for case notifications so that if there is a particular case you're interested in, you can receive an email each time a new document is filed. And there on to the right side of the page is my contact information. Always very willing to have a phone call down the road, hopefully meet in person with folks. But anytime you do have a question, do feel free to reach out to us. we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Jean-Paul, that's it for me, but I'll hand it back off to you for any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Matt. That was extraordinarily informative. One question for you, and then I'll jump into the chat because we got quite a few questions in. One thing that you brought up, and I know I probably brought it up as well in our talks leading up to this, is during the informational meeting, a map is needed. And that map is meant to show a general location of where land is being assembled in order to move these projects forward. Of course, the community comes in, they see this map, they realize it's right next to their home, and they get concerned. In your opinion, what are some of the best avenues for a local government to be able to kind of mitigate those concerns prior?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, good question. And you're right. One of the big things, back when our public informational meetings were held in person, the first thing that you would see, and I'm sure Dale would agree with me on this, is you'd see people clustered around the maps, whether it's a solar project, a wind project, a transmission line. You're right. That's really what people want to see, is how close is this project going to be to my residence or my farm. I think some of the things that local government can do, and I'm sure Dale can add to this later. Number one, I would say establish contact with the board and the developer as early as possible to let them know that as a local government, they are interested in the concerns of their residents, that they will advocate for them if they need to. I would also say that anything that a local official can do to share that process and communicate that process on behalf of the board, or put those individuals who may have concerns in touch with us, that's always very helpful as well. But I think the key to it all is communication and establishing those relationships so that we can have those discussions.
How about you, Dale? What are your thoughts?
Okay. John Paul, this is Dale. Just to add what Matt has said, one thing we tell our folks basically is this, is that you're correct. Usually at the local information meetings, you will have contact information for those field representatives. Invite them out to your home, let them see basically what is going on with regard to that, and start that dialogue. Also, too, reach out to the Power Siting Board. Everything is a matter of public record. Writing a letter, asking possibly for some assistance to be able to get that information so you can talk with folks. We tell folks this too. When it comes to the local public hearing, if you were treated well and the company addressed a number of your concerns, let the Power Siting Board and others know that through the local hearing process. And again, if the company didn't, that information needs to be shared too. But that's part of the process, and we help a number of our members and neighbors for these projects get involved in that type of process to make sure their concerns are heard.
Great, thank you. All right, jumping into the chat. Matt, you answered the smallest size project that the OPSB gets involved with, and that's 50 megawatts. Dale, the next question's for you. What do you see as the potential impact on solar if Senate Bill 6 is taken out of the state statute?
Oh God, yeah, because I can see the chat line, and Neil has that, or Mr. Nine has those questions. I'm taking a look at this, even though SB 6 is still going on, and you're taking a look at provisions having to do with some coal-fired and nuclear facilities here in Ohio. We are still going to need additional resources of power generation going forward. And consequently, you're seeing that right now with solar. You're seeing it right now with on-site generation. You're seeing it with advanced cycle natural gas-fired turbine generation. those projects will continue to go forward regardless of SB6 provisions are here or not, because of our need basically for the energy.
Awesome. Dale and Matt, too, a question came in regarding can local governments request specific types of land cover for these projects, thinking native species versus sod or bare ground. Along those lines, what are the other opportunities for local governments to make specific requests out of projects, whether that is with ground cover or whether that's with perhaps programming that might be a part of agreements in this?
Yeah. Matt, I'll let you go first.
Sure. Yeah, I think the key here is, like I had mentioned earlier, that really, and this goes to both the board and the developer, that if we don't hear from the community about areas where they have concerns and they don't express those concerns or interests, then we're not aware of those concerns or interests. So I do think it is important for those local communities to advocate for themselves and their residents. And if they have concerns like the native species versus invasive species, that's something to share early on, first with the developer as they plan the project, but then later with the board through our process. And I would just say too that the board has been making it really a standard in these solar cases to encourage developers to use pollinator species, native cover, but also the Farm Bureau has worked with us through some stipulations with the staff to encourage the avoidance of noxious weeds, and I'll let Dale talk a little bit more about that. But that touches on that specific issue, but I think in general, just any area where a local government has something that they would like to see, the earlier and more often that they communicate that to us, the better.
Yeah. Building upon what Matthew said, I guess I need to say this. Welcome to my world. You now know one of the major reasons why the Ohio Farm Bureau has been involved with these projects, as well as pipelines, transmission lines, wind, and others. Each one of these, a vegetative management plan for repair, remediation, maintenance of the ground underneath the solar panels is part of the process. You're not going to see a project like you'd see basically out west, or a small project where inlaid gravel and compaction happens. There's a vegetative management plan. I would say this: township trustees, county commissioners have the ability basically to discuss that if and when they file a motion to intervene to be part of a party of record. We've helped counties and townships be part of that process. We also highly suggest that the local Soil and Water Conservation District, the SWCD, also be involved in those particular discussions. The Power Siting Board approves programs where those vegetative management plans, basically with regard to mowing, noxious weed control, pollinator habitat, utilization basically of native tree species, different things, protection of soil and water, highly erodible soils, woodlots is part of that particular process. We get involved, as Matt said, in negotiating a number of those in every project we've been in, and township trustees and county governments, and as a matter of fact, other interested parties who become parties of record are allowed to do that as part of the process.
All right, let's see, I'll throw out two questions at once. Matt, the first one's definitely for you. How many or what % of solar projects are denied, and what are the typical reasons to get denied? Along those same lines, who is responsible for projects under 50 megawatts?
I'll mute myself there. Let me take the second part of that question first. Projects below our jurisdiction threshold, whether that's 50 megawatts for solar or 5 megawatts for wind, would fall to the local jurisdiction. What those regulations may be, I think, would vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and I think Dale probably knows more about that than I do. But the first part of that question, has the board think it says there, has the board ever denied a project? Typically, with projects that are, for lack of a better term, just bad projects, what you'll see happen is those projects will, at some point through the process, the applicant may withdraw the application, so that it wouldn't even get to the point where the board would be making a decision. Now, of these, I believe now 9 solar projects that have gotten to the board for actual decision, those have all been approved. However, there were 2 projects that are still pending in Probable County, the Alamo project and the Angelina project, that were really sent back to the developer. The board has had some additional questions on those for seeking clarification on certain issues. So those projects are still pending. So that's really how the process is designed, is if the board is missing information, they'll reach back to the applicant and get more information. So it's hard to say specifically, as I'm looking down here at that question again. Let me find it here. What precedents have been set? And maybe I'm looking at the wrong question here, but I think the question was something about what areas of concern would the board have that would lead to a project being denied. And it's really hard to answer that question. Each case is different, but certainly, again, it really comes down to the level of participation. We encourage the local governments to get involved. We encourage the local landowners to get involved. We're not going to know you have those concerns unless you bring those concerns to us.
Yeah. John Paul, building upon what Matt basically has said, and I think this came from Sarah Spence. So hello, Sarah, I can see that here, and we work closely with a number of particular folks. One thing we'll say basically is this: what's interesting about the process here in Ohio, as I talk to my counterparts in other states that have kind of like a mixture of different regulatory and approval processes that go forward, here we have one that was established in 1973. It goes for all power generation, nuclear, coal, as well as the renewables. And also, too, it's a judicial process where judicial scrutiny takes precedence and hearsay can't necessarily apply. Also, too, as Matt has said, because people have always asked me, how come we haven't seen them deny any projects? I can say here in Ohio, and this is not to brag, because it's a judicial process, it's very extensive as compared to other states. And I tell you, a number of years ago, when you saw solar development coming forward, there were upwards of 32 different developers talking with farmers, rural residents, and local communities about solar projects in this state. When those companies took a look at the requirements of the Ohio Power Siting Board and our ability to be involved in those particular processes, there's about 6 that are left. And so I think basically the process basically here, because of what you have to go through for approval in Ohio, is the gatekeeper with regard to that. And companies will not make any significant investments until basically they make those decisions to go through the particular process. And so I think that's why you're seeing it here. That's it with that, John Paul. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have a few more. It seems we have 2 questions on this one in regards to land valuation after these projects. Is there any evidence? Are there any studies that discuss the devaluation of neighboring land? And does that factor into the Ohio Power Siting Board as far as decisions that are made or impacts that are occurring?
Yeah, that is a concern that we often hear from local landowners. The 8 criteria that I described before, property valuation really isn't a part of the board's review, and we certainly understand that that's a question that people do have, and I know that some of the developers have been able to provide some studies to individuals on a case-by-case basis there. but it's not an issue that the board specifically reviews during its investigation.
This is Dale. Building upon what Matthew said, that's always a concern with a number of particular folks, and I think rightly so. And Matthew's correct. When you take a look at the local information meetings and local public hearings, the companies always basically say that they are doing a number of particular studies basically to measure that potential impact. A lot of our folks who have been involved in those local public hearings and those local information meetings have requested to see that information and material. The companies that have been participating in those has been making that available to them. And I can also stand to be corrected because not necessarily in solar, but in wind, which is similar with regard to renewable energy development, several companies basically also incorporated a number of studies that were done into their particular permits. And I can remember basically being involved in several of the judicial proceedings where the technical companies that did those studies were asked basically to send the persons who've done that. And in the judicial process that Matt discussed, those folks were open basically for examination, cross-examination, and discussion with regard to that. I also know too that a number of folks basically are be doing a number of these studies that are specific to Ohio, and we'll be seeing more information and materials and discussion about that going forward.
Great, thank you. And just to touch on that as well, tomorrow we'll have Gilbert Michaud from the Voinovich School of Policy at Ohio University, and I know that he has also looked at this topic, so he would be a great person to bring this question up to again. All right, from Don Hollister, asking as a Greene County, Miami Township trustee, the considerations listed of environmental impact, conservation practices, soil damage, and continued agricultural viability are very open-ended. What precedents have been set, and will the staff and board pay attention to detailed suggestions for specific requirements of a project?
Sure, I can take that. Yeah, I know that those criteria are rather open-ended. However, there are very specific requirements in the application requirements that a developer must comply with when they bring a project into the board. I would maybe suggest that Mr. Hollister, and I could get in touch with him later, I'm sure, that he reviews some of the staff reports of investigation that have been produced for these projects that have come through to this point, that would be a good resource for him to take a look at some of the precedents that have been set, to also review the board opinions that have come out, the orders that have provided certificates to approve projects, to be able to review some of the conditions that are listed in those, and then also some of the things that the applicants have committed to and sort of build up over the last couple of years as these projects have come into the board. So there's a lot of good information out there on the board website, and I think I'd be happy to have a conversation with Mr. Hollister to point him to those resources.
Yeah. This is Dale. Building upon what Matt basically has said, now you understand one of the strengths basically of this particular system. This is a judicial proceeding. Your ability basically as a party of record, as a township trustee or local government official, to in each individual case, take a look at basically negotiating special provisions with regard to what you want to see done with vegetative management plans, road use maintenance agreements, other things basically that will impact the local community on the township level, quality of life issues. And in the discussions that I've been involved with in negotiating stipulations and agreements going forward, yes, there's a number of basic issues and numbers and texts in there, but all of them are rather unique, where parties are able to come together, take a look at unique needs, and find ways to address them in the negotiation process. And Matthew's correct. If you take a look at a number of staff reports, a number of stipulations and agreements filed in the judicial process in these cases, there's always provisions in there having to do with, quote, unique needs of a local community and what needs to be done to address them. That's why we have this process and why we're involved.
Awesome. I want to skip down because this could be a bigger question. I'm sure it's something that everyone's thinking because it's a question that I get often. From Greene County, can local governments regulate any factors through township zoning, such as setbacks, screening, maintenance, etc.? And as well, along the same lines, Greene County is currently updating the Farmland Preservation Plan and 20-year land use plan. What impact will that have on the board's decisions, and does the staff review those plans during their process?
Yes, the staff certainly would review a document like that during its process. So we'd be very interested in seeing any updates. In fact, I think I was on a staff call the other day where some individuals mentioned that they had heard that Greene County was working on some updates to their land use plan. So while there is no local government zoning jurisdiction in these projects, we, number one, would highly encourage any developer to meet any local zoning when possible. And in instances when they are not, we would be reviewing any local land use plans as part of our review process and working with the local officials and landowners to pull in that information and review it. So anything that they may have and would want to provide to us, we would be, of course, considering.
Yeah. John, Paul, Matt, this is Dale. Building upon that, I'm kind of glad you've asked the particular question. One of the things, and I work with township trustees all over the state on these energy related issues besides Greene, worked with a number of them. A lot of people get concerned when they hear first about the Power Siting Board process and the precedents and their ability and their need to supersede local rule and regulation. Many folks say, does that mean the township or the county government is out? The answer is no. Now you know basically how grave and how precious your responsibility is to be involved basically as a party of record in this case to discuss and advocate your constituents' positions. You're able to do a number of those particular things there. Also, too, a lot of counties will ask me, and this goes back to another question here, is that, you know, if the Power Siting Board is 50 megawatts or above, we have the ability to be involved in that particular process. I've had a lot of township trustees saying, man, I'm kind of glad that I understood that option, because I tell you, when you take a look at all the technical, environmental, aesthetic, social requirements on power siting, I would rather work with people who have that technical expertise, like with the Power Siting Board and key state and federal agencies, to try to do it myself. And so folks who've gotten involved in that process have benefited from it. Also, too, for folks that are 50 megawatts or less, they're saying, what do I do with regard to that? Local zoning does have that authority. I've worked very closely with the Ohio Townships Association, the County Commissions Association, MORPC, and other economic development groups throughout the state. We help and do training to help local jurisdiction create those planning documents and the zoning ordinances and different things. For more information on that, contact basically us at the County Farm Bureau, and we can work with you to help you get started in that particular process, to do those planning documents, those ordinances you might see when someone wants to do on-site solar, when someone wants to do basically a larger solar array for an industrial park. And you have one right now down near Washington Courthouse, which is 47.7 megawatts. It's under local jurisdiction, different things. And being able to understand and appreciate how you can help govern that process at the level that you have ultimate responsibility on. Back to you, John Paul.
All right, so I think we have 2 questions left, and easy one and a little bit more of a difficult one. Matt, will you be sharing your slides with everybody? I'm happy to pass them around if you'll make them available.
Yep, certainly.
Cool. And then the other one is, these projects are 15, 20-year projects. Some area farmers are dependent on leasing neighboring acreage that will no longer be available if these projects go forward. Is that immediate economic impact considered as part of approving these projects?
So basically, I think this individual is asking if land is taken out of production. There are instances where, and maybe I'm coming at this wrong, maybe Dale understands the question a little better, but there are developers who will provide for good neighbor agreements to adjoining landowners who may be impacted by projects. Now that's really a developer by developer consideration. Sometimes that's a financial consideration, and sometimes it's something like recently I know one of the developers is providing solar panels for neighboring residents as a good neighbor agreement, so that they're providing rooftop residential solar for those neighbors. I don't know, Dale, do you have anything from the ag perspective? Maybe you understand that question a little better than I am.
Yeah, a little better, and I'll be more than happy to take more clarification later on, and you can get in contact with it. But what we're also seeing is this: in the cases we're involved with, Matt is correct. Depending on the developer, and also part of this particular process, and I can stand to be corrected, they have to show and give evidence that they are working with adjoining landowners to address their concerns. Adjoining landowners cannot be ignored. Some companies are very, very good at doing this, where they will go out, individuals see each one, take a look basically at what can be done to address the issue. We've seen some do good neighbor agreements. We've seen some basically provide solar for their home and personal use. We've seen others basically take a look at in creating endowments and community development plans and resources to take a look at quality of life issues going forward. Those discussions are part of the process, and I would highly encourage township trustees and county commissioners, when you're talking with them, to talk about those particular issues. And so that's done there. For other questions and different things, or I need additional clarification, please send me an email and I'll get back in touch with you. John Paul, back to you.
All right, last question, and then if you guys have any closing thoughts, can you clarify who is eligible to intervene? I think you said individuals and local governments. What about community-based organizations?
Yes, really anyone can request intervention in a case. The difference is that local government has really automatic right to intervene. And they simply have to file a notice that states that they plan to intervene, whereas a landowner or an organization would have to demonstrate the reasons why, and then our administrative law judge would make a determination based upon the evidence presented as to whether or not to allow that individual. But certainly anyone can request intervention.
Yeah. This is Dale. I have to agree with Matthew with regard to that. And again, welcome to my world, because the Ohio Farm Bureau follows that process. In every case, they filed a motion to intervene and become a party of record in. As a matter of fact, our motions to intervene, you will find on every docket card as a matter of basically of record. And we negotiate for a number of key provisions and stipulations and agreements going forward. We've also helped local community groups who have had concerns get involved in that process, as well as individuals. And I would say this: take a look at the Ohio Revised Code, take a look at the Ohio Administrative Code and the resources Matt has given you. And also remember this: this is a judicial process. At the judicial proceedings, judicial scrutiny applies. I highly advise folks, you don't go in there and say, I just don't like this or whatever, because two words you're going to have to address are prove it, which means having good legal counsel, which means also having evidence, being able to plan, negotiate, and work with a number of other parties of record to create stipulations and agreement are very much huge. There's also another part as part of this particular process. You have to agree to be part basically of a collaborative process to work with a number of particular folks to come up with issues and concerns and addressing them. If you're doing this just basically to stall a project or whatever, that will not work. However, if you want to go that particular process, if you understand the responsibilities, we can help you and refer you to legal counsel to advise and work with you with regard to that, and welcome you to be part of this process too. John Paul, back to you.
All right. Excuse me. So we're about 5 minutes from close. I'm just gonna do a quick touch up again on the following days of Solar Week. But do either of you have any final thoughts for the attendees on things they should take away or ensure that they're thinking about as Solar Week continues?
This is Dale. I guess I'll go first. Again, this is the start of a conversation. If you have any other questions or would like to go into more detail discuss, please contact your local county farm bureau organization director. Your public policy action teams will work with us to do that, or get a hold of me on the email basically supplied in my presentation. And this message also basically is for solar developers who are also on this particular program. I think you understand and appreciate as a solar or an energy service provider, some of your responsibilities you are going to need to perform when it comes to education, outreach, working with local governments, working with community stakeholders. And I say this early and often when I meet with them. For every dollar that you spend right now and invest basically in education, outreach, community development, creating basically plans with regard to quality of life, addressing concerns, every dollar that you spend right now is going to save you about $15 in litigation on the other side of the process. We all need to be around the table and we all need to work together. Thank you.
John Paul, real quick, before we wrap up, I would just add to that that the board really hopes that this is just the beginning and that local government continues to engage with the board and its process. We're always happy to have discussions with individual officials. We can walk landowners through the process and how they can get involved in that as well. So really anything we can do as a resource in terms of the process. Now, obviously, as the adjudicator of these projects, we can't give advice or point people in some of the same directions that maybe the Farm Bureau is able to do. But we're always here as a resource to answer any questions that folks may have about our process.
All right, well, thank you both. I love talking to you guys because I learn something new every time. And I'm sure, well, I hope our attendees feel the same way, and definitely this was a lot to chew on. If anyone has further questions that come up, feel free to send them to me or reach out directly to Dale or Matt. Tomorrow, again, we'll be talking about the economic development side. We'll have Gilbert Michaud from Ohio University, as well as John Workman from ODSA. And I'm going to touch on a few of the community consideration parts as part of this. Yes, we will make the recording available, and I'll be certain to send out slides as well. All right, thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.